Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
In a lot of rural schools, the very best teacher in the building is also the one who teaches what they teach. The only chemistry teacher, the only one running the third grade classroom, the only special education teacher for 3 schools. And they're all doing extraordinary work. And they're doing it often with just, a single colleague down the hall who can say, hey, I've been there. Here's what helped me. And that isolation is one of the reasons that we often lose good educators, especially in our rural places. And it's exactly the problem that my guest today set out to solve. Before we dig in, though, if you care about keeping great teachers in rural classrooms, please take a second to subscribe to the Rural Scoop. It helps other rural leaders find these conversations, and it helps us keep elevating the people who are doing this work. My guest today is Dr. Ildi Laczko-Kerr, who is a veteran educator who spent decades inside Arizona public education, from leading state accountability and data systems at the Arizona Department of Education to overseeing curriculum and professional development at the district level before she decided to try something new. She's the co-founder and CEO of Ribbit Learning Company, which is a platform that delivers personalized virtual coaching to educators wherever they are and lets them choose their own coach. The whole idea rests on a belief that I personally share, and that's that coaching isn't a punishment for struggling teachers. It's something that every educator deserves for their entire career. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about why she left the system to build for it, and how she's rethinking professional learning from the ground up, and why her model might be one of the best promising answers that we have to the isolation and turnover problem that rural schools all know all too well. So let's get into it. Ildi, thanks for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So you really have, and I've followed your career as a fellow Arizona educator. You've had just a remarkable career across many corners of education. So before we talk about Ribbit, can you tell us who you are and how you came to this work?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Ildi Laczko-Kerr. I am an educator by heart and by training. I just finished my 25th year working in K-12 education, all here in Arizona. And as you said, I've had really all of the jobs. I've taught high school-age children privately. I've been at the Department of Ed. I've worked in a big school district and nonprofit in accountability and policy. But my favorite jobs have always been working directly with teachers and leaders to help them build capacity. And ultimately, our goal is to improve student achievement, but we can't do that if we don't help improve the quality of instruction, and that starts with teachers.
Yeah. You spent years really on the data and the accountability side of education at the state level, which is actually how I first met you. You were doing some data dives with people out in the field. What did that vantage point teach you that you still think about today, and how does it impact your work today?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually where I was introduced to rural schools for the first time. So when I was at the Department of Education, one of the things we cared a lot about was to get out into the field and hear from practitioners as we were building the state and federal accountability models in the early 2000s. And so I literally went all over the state. I was up in Kayenta. I was down in Douglas. I was as far west as Fort Mojave and far east as Stafford. So I covered the entire state, me and my team. And so being able to really hear kind of where the pain points were and how they varied, because obviously big, large metropolitan areas have a different set of contexts than our rural schools. And truly that helped me understand the vast differences. Growing up in Arizona, I love a road trip. I'm a daughter of a long distance truck driver, so being on the road is nothing new to me. But seeing the education perspective from the rural perspective that was the first time. And that has truly stuck with me. I learned so much about the variability in our state through that work.
Yeah. And then somewhere along the way, you move from inside the system to building a company, which that's a very drastic move. So what was the turning point that made you take that leap?
Well, so Ribbit is actually the fourth coaching, I'll say, company or endeavor that I've created. So the first was in a big school district. The second was when I was at the Charter Schools Association as their chief academic officer, and I built a team of coaches that we were going all over the state again, training and supporting teachers. Then that turned into a consultancy, which lots of educators make that transition. And it was actually in that work, in a rural school community, that the idea for Ribbit came. I was driving back from Kingman while I still had reception on the switchbacks coming down the hill. I was talking to my business partner and said, there's got to be a more efficient way to deliver and scale coaching support to rural schools. And by efficient, I meant cost efficient, because the amount of resources and services that they were getting compared to what a school in Maricopa County would be getting for the same price was not nearly the same. And from an equity lens, that's just not that's not right. So we really wanted to solve for that. And so we thought, okay, let's go look to see if there was something. This was 2020, before the pandemic. So before we were all going on Teams and Zooms and everything else. And there really wasn't anything out on the market that I thought was what we, needed. And so we decided to build it. That was, 6 years ago now, but building it has been a fun job, but still the core of our work is connecting with educators and supporting teachers. So it's a technology platform, but it's really grounded in a human-centric model of support.
Yeah. Yeah, you did launch it in really the thick of one of the hardest stretches of public education ever.
We were all working really hard those couple of years.
Yeah, we sure were. When you look at why good educators leave the profession, from your experience, Ildi, what do you believe is most often the real reason that they decide this is just not for me anymore?
There's actually really great data, especially in Arizona, about why teachers leave. And not surprising, it's around burnout. It's around feelings of isolation. It's feeling that they're not supported. And support means 1,000 different things to 1,000 different teachers, which is a challenge for leaders. What one teacher wants support to look like might be vastly different than another. But truly, it's around this idea of not feeling like you have the capacity to do your work. Most of us as educators want to do the best that we can with the kids that we have. And when we start to feel like we don't have either the skills to do that, the support to grow to do that, it's a really deflating and a frustrating kind of work. And so, leaving the profession, unfortunately, is what happens when that, occurs at scale.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what was broken or what could have been done better about the way that professional learning was being delivered to teachers when you launched Ribbit?
So part of the reason the way that we built up the company was intentional by design, trying to address as many of the concerns or criticisms even around coaching in your intro. This idea that coaching is often seen as pathological, right? There's something wrong with you, and so you have to be fixed. That is absolutely not the case. We know that coaching is the number one way for educators to learn, to implement what they're learning in their practice, and all educators from the first year to their last year should have a coach. But the reality is that's not happening. And a lot of that is, one, because of capacity. There aren't enough coaches to go around to truly meet the needs of all of the educators in a building. We don't want to pull teachers out of the classroom to be able to do that work. We want to keep those best teachers in the classroom to work with kids. So we have a limited amount of staffing. And then honestly, it's just a budget constraint, right? You don't have in a small school or district, especially in a rural community, you don't have the human capital or the budget really to effectively do that. So that was one of the key drivers that led us to build the model that we did, which is we want to keep teachers in the classroom. So we want to give them an opportunity, if they want to coach outside of their contracted time. So they earn a little bit of extra money, but also, stay really grounded in the work. And that we have a model where we can scale up or down depending on the size of the school. So we've worked with school districts where we've coached literally one educator because it was a small rural community and that's what they needed, to school systems where we're coaching 100% of the staff. And so it really varies. But I think those are some of the challenges, the core challenges in most district professional development is human capital and budget.
So, as an educator, there was a negative stereotype about coaching. And obviously that has since, I think, been rethought by the profession. But where did that come from? Where did that old negative idea come from? And why has it been so sticky? Because there's still a lot of that perception that's out in the field.
Well, I think it came from, unfortunately, leaders who thought that the role of the coach was to fix their teachers. And so when you have an educator whose primary responsibility is to go into another teacher's classroom and coach them up on something, it can feel like an evaluation or an evaluative task or activity. One of the challenges of site-based coaches is also that sometimes they're seen as quasi-administrators. Mm. And so there's a real blurry line between, are you here to help me? Or are you here as a gotcha? Are you here kind of spying on me for the principal? Or am I in trouble if you walk in the room? I mean, we all worked with teachers and in schools where if a coach walks into your room, the rumor is something's wrong with you and they're working your way out of the system.
Yeah.
So I think that's because of our own doing. We've used coaching wrong for so long that it's taking us a long time to really shift the schema of coaching to what you said at the beginning. Every teacher, every leader should have a coach that is thoughtful and helpful, and that support really feels like support.
Yeah. How do you think a school could address changing its culture so that coaching really does feel like, it's a positive, it's an honor rather than a red flag like you're talking about?
Well, I think the number one way, honestly, and some administrators aren't going to like to hear this, is that they need to model being coached. And I think also administrators are the last to want to receive coaching because they don't want to take that resource away from their teachers. So the budget that they would expend on themselves for coaching feels like something that should be given to teachers, which I agree with. But if we're not modeling that we're receptive to coaching, that we're receiving coaching, and that we're in and engaging a cycle of continuous improvement ourselves, I think it's hard for educators in your building to really believe that you're invested in coaching. So I would say the first thing is leaders should look to themselves and see who, and whether it's formal or an informal process, it doesn't, you don't have to pay for coaching necessarily, but if you can communicate to your staff that I'm receiving coaching, here's how I'm growing as a leader, that I think will go a long way to change the culture in your school system around coaching.
Ildi, can you talk about why, we talk about it with students, but we don't talk about it with educators, the importance of voice and choice and agency being really at the center of coaching and a coaching program?
Well, voice, choice, and agency are the underpinnings of adult learning theory. And so one of the other challenges of professional development oftentimes is we don't consider adult learning as we're developing and designing adult learning experiences. And so that's a frustration, obviously, to educators. That was really important to us when we were thinking about designing our coaching model. So voice for us is that educators are leading the coaching conversation. They're sharing their problems of practice or their opportunities for growth. Now, of course, they're within the context of the school. And so if the school has adopted a new curriculum, or they're a K-3 teacher and they're working on the science of reading in their building, that's going to inform a lot of what happens in coaching as well. But allowing an educator to say, this is the area that I really need support in. And it may not necessarily be this systematic approach that the whole school is working on. I think it's incredibly important. For us, choice matters a lot. And so it looks in our model, as you said, our educators that we work with get to choose their coach from our entire cadre of coaches. We intentionally don't have AI in our system. We don't have any algorithms that match educators to coaches because we would get it wrong most of the time. And so instead, educators get to use some filtering tools and they narrow down their search based on what they really need. And then they get to choose a coach. And once they're connected to that coach, they work through their coaching cycle. But they're also never stuck with that coach. So if for whatever reason that coach is not meeting their needs, or they might have walked for an entire coaching cycle, and now they're shifting to another area of focus, and there's a different coach that would be better suited for that particular area, they can switch their coach at any time. And so it gives them the ability to work with many educators to be able to support their learning, as opposed to the one coach that's assigned to your building in a traditional kind of site-based model. It's all about agency, right? So just like with students, as you said, if we don't put the decision-making into the hands of our teachers, we know we can be proved wrong very easily. Yeah. So they have to own, and not just buy in, but they have to own the decisions that are made in a coaching conversation. They have to be able to come up and generate and problem solve with the coach, but ultimately make a decision about what's best within the context of their classroom, with the students they serve, within, the systems that they're working in. And so many times in a traditional district setting, those are limitations because, again, that site-based coach has a job to do. There's a focus in that district or that school. There's a task that needs to get done. And so oftentimes it feels more coach-driven than educator-driven. And until we can shift even in a site-based model to a more educator-driven coaching model, I think it's going to continue to feel like a punishment in some cases, as opposed to the benefit that it really is.
Yeah, that's well said. And most coaching that I've seen stood up when I was still a principal, and then even as a superintendent, it was very district focused. What were the goals of the district? How were you performing? If you weren't performing up to the certain level that we wanted to see, now we're going to coach you, and it's going to be in this particular area. And there wasn't that choice. So I can see how it would be perceived as a negative. Can you talk about what a leader might want to think about in terms of a coaching opportunity being seen as one more thing? Especially in a rural community where you have teachers that wear a lot of hats already and have a lot of things on their plate. How do we want to approach having this set up for a teacher that I have one more thing I got to do?
Yeah, I think it's really the way that we communicate the value of coaching, what they're going to get out of it. And so when we come in as a partner, during our onboarding, we really talk about the very first slide on our onboarding PowerPoint deck is, you're not broken and we're not here to fix you. And so that, I think, sets the stage for, we are here to help with whatever you need support in, whether that's implementing curriculum, differentiating instruction for your student, trying to tackle a behavior problem in your classroom. And so it's really that side-by-side, peer-to-peer support system versus just one more thing. I think it also is just-in-time coaching. So in a traditional district model where you have to wait to be on a coach's calendar and a schedule because they have so many other teachers that they're supporting, in our model, the educators drive the coaching session scheduling. So they're the ones who decide when they want to have a coaching session, for how long, and kind of initiate that coaching work. In school systems where they can do it, being able to carve out time for coaching during the contracted day is essential, so that it doesn't feel like one more thing. Yeah. If it has to be done before school or after school or the weekend, it might feel that way. But I can tell you the first things that surprised me after our first winter break, when we launched it, that we had coaching sessions happening throughout winter break.
Oh.
And that to me said that these were educators who were motivated, but also empowered to fit in coaching when it fit their schedule. So we tell everyone, we want you to do this during your contracted time. That's when you're supposed to be working. But because we've left it up to those educators, we've empowered them to schedule their own sessions. We have coaching happening over every break on the weekend, late into the evenings, early in the mornings, because they're fitting it in when that works for them. And so I think, again, unlike a traditional site-based coaching model where your coach is there from 7 to 4 or whatever time they arrive and leave, and you can't fit into that schedule, you didn't get coaching that day. So I think really that feeling of empowerment is one of the things that are driving this feeling away from it's one more thing to do to this is a value, this is a support to me.
Yeah. If there are listeners that really have never taught in a remote school or a rural school, what might they, because you've had experience with those types of settings, what might they misunderstand about the kind of professional loneliness that's really a part of that environment, or that can be a part of that environment? And how does coaching fit into that?
Yeah, I think especially isolation is such a hard thing to tackle. And I would say rural schools have a particular type of isolation. I was talking to an educator not that long ago about being isolated, and used a rural school example. And she pointed out, she was in a very large comprehensive high school, that I'm the only math teacher in the business wing. And there are 20 other math teachers, but I never see them. So I feel just as isolated in a big school as maybe a rural school teacher does. And that made me think back to context, right? Like, we think that big systems, there's lots of collaboration. There's always opportunity for people to work together. And that's not always the case. Having said that, being in a rural community where, we've worked with schools where there's 4 teachers, right? They have multi-age classrooms. Each of them has a load of students that they're doing, plus interventions and small groups, and they don't have time to get together in collaboration. Not only is there not time set aside for the day just because of the nature of the way that they have to schedule classes, but the structure doesn't allow for it. And so I do think that being in a rural community and not being able to connect to other colleagues is maybe more disheartening in a way, because you would think there's just 4 of us. We should be able to find time to get together and collaborate, but the logistics don't lend for it. And I think that also can create a lot more frustration and lead to a lot more, churn in school. Yeah.
And to expand on that point, retention really is an everybody crisis right now. Yeah. It doesn't matter what your locale is, but in a rural place, small districts are really hit hardest by turnover. And when a teacher in a rural place leaves, they are harder to replace. Can you talk about what kinds of connections you've seen coaching be able to do to keep educators in the profession and in their communities? Do you have any stories of how that has been successful?
Yeah, actually, I'll point to our partnership with Safford Unified School District. AJ Taylor and I have presented on this, and so I know he wouldn't mind if I shared. So the first year that we started coaching in Safford, we actually started coaching long-term subs because they didn't have staff to even cover classrooms. And of course, they had identified that they needed support. These were not educators by training. They were community members, some, however they got into the substitute work. But they had committed to providing support. And so each of those long-term subs received a Ribbit coach and worked with that coach. Again, very differentiated, very personalized, just-in-time, context-specific support. And I'm really happy to say that the majority of those long-term subs have got into and stayed as full-time teachers. Mm-hmm. So they were hired on. They're still getting support and coaching and mentoring throughout our system and theirs. But it gave Safford an opportunity to really have a grow your own program with the community members that were showing up for them. And obviously, living in a rural community means that you're maybe more likely to stay in the rural community. I think one of the biggest challenges is when we bring people into a rural community from outside of it and they don't have a connection to that community. It's a lot easier to leave.
Yeah.
And so that turnover, it sounds great to bring in people from, whatever urban areas. And some people genuinely do want to go and work in rural communities. But when it gets really hard, it's a lot easier to leave than if you grew up in that community and you've got deep, deep ties and roots to it. So I think, growing your own in a rural community is really one of the most powerful ways to attract teachers, but I think retain them in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that acknowledgement that rurality isn't everybody's background or perspective growing up. I mean, you have people that come into a rural community and have never experienced it before, and it's different. The context, as you said, really does matter. Absolutely. So, rural educators, any educator, they have no time to waste, right? And they've all sat through, you and I too, have sat through generic professional development. Back to school has nothing to do with our actual classroom practice. all of those things that we've had to do in the course of our career. Can you talk a little bit about the personalization impact that really has changed the equation for some of the districts that you've worked for?
Yeah, I mean, I still call those trainings cheeks in the seat training, right? Your booty is in a seat and you're sitting there for as long as it goes. And there's literally nothing worse than that. And we know, I've led those, we've led them. They're horrible to lead, they're horrible to receive. Yep. I think the nature of personalized one-on-one coaching means that we are differentiating for every single learner, an adult learner, every single time. And one of the most powerful things that I think we bring to the table is in a school partner, let's say we're coaching 20 teachers or 20 educators, because we actually have been privileged to coach not just classroom teachers, but paraprofessionals, interventionists, site-based coaches, leaders, anyone in the building. But if there are 20 educators in the building, they can have 20 different coaches working with those educators. And so it is truly differentiated. And those coaches have that grade level, that content specific pedagogy, so that it isn't just a general, here's how you do an engagement strategy. And you kindergarten teacher try to figure out how to make that work. And you high school teacher try to figure out how to make the same strategy work with your students, right? Because we expect educators to be able to do that, like receive information, figure out how to differentiate it for ourselves, and then put it into practice when we've never seen it done before. That always goes swimmingly well. No. But that's really the power of a coach, is that even if a school or district has a back to school professional development that's a little bit more, kind of middle ground strategies that should work in every grade or content area, a Ribbit coach could come along and actually help that grade level teacher implement that within their own classroom. That teacher could say, I'm supposed to be implementing universal design for learning principles. I don't even know where to start. So then they together can really build an action plan to figure out, when do I need to, learn about that concept? Where do I start? What resources do I already have available to me? And so it truly is that personalized support, unlike any, professional development that I've seen otherwise.
Yeah. Oh, I want to switch focus just a little bit, Ildi, and talk about relationship building and trust, because that's something you are vulnerable as an educator working with a coach, and really talking about your areas for improvement is not comfortable for everybody. So can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about building real trust between people that may not ever sit in the same room?
Yeah, trust is such an important part of the coaching relationship. It lives and breathes and dies by trust or the lack thereof. So for us, part of our process, for all of our coaches, they go through a micro-credential course first before they even interview with us. Part of it is we want to have a common understanding of what good, effective coaching looks like from the research and evidence base. In the micro-credential, we spend 3 units on adult learning theory, psychological safety, and how to build it in a coaching relationship, and communication strategies. So a third of our entire course is building trust, essentially. And so we want to make sure that coaches have tools in their toolkit to be able to build rapport and trust with the people that they're coaching. In our model, I think we actually can accelerate trust in a way that isn't possible in a site-based model. Again, because the educator's picking their coach, they've seen something in that coach that already tells them that there's some value there. And so that coach doesn't have to sell themselves or try to, defend their background or experience in a way that a site-based coach might have to if they don't have the same years of experience or the content area expertise. So we're able to rapidly build trust from that perspective. But we also come in and make it incredibly clear that we are confidential in our coaching conversations, and that we are non-evaluative. And so because we are a third-party external coaching support, it's again, another layer of trust building that we're able to create with those educators. The leaders in the schools that we partner with know this going into it, so I'm sharing it now. And sometimes, and frankly, we're not right for everybody because of this reason. there is actually no connection between the site-based leader and the Ribbit coaches that are coaching teachers. So the leader cannot communicate directly with the coach to find out what's happening in a coaching cycle. Now, we can create systems for that leader to understand what's happening in the coaching process, but there's not a one-to-one communication. And again, educators know that from the very beginning when we onboard them. So when we say it's confidential, we really mean that it's confidential. And it really does allow educators to open up and be willing to take risks where they may not have, taken risks before. The fact that we're not in their building means that, we're not walking down the hallway and seeing them, do whatever. We're not sitting in a staff meeting, hearing them, maybe lose their temper about something or, whatever. Right. There's no judgment because we're in a coaching session and then we're not in their classroom after that. So it really creates that boundary in our coaching model that that's not possible in a site-based coaching world.
Yeah. How do you, speaking to that, how do you make sure that there's a connection rather than a transactional relationship that's developed? Because online can be not personal. I mean, yes, individualized and personalized to what they need, but how do you make sure that online relationship really feels like it's a collaboration between two professionals that are connected?
That's a great question. A lot of it goes back to sort of the way that we train our coaches in the inquiry model that we have. So I took all of my favorite parts of all of the coaching models that people will know, and I'm not going to name them here, and put them together into our own designated coaching model that we think we can do pretty effectively in a virtual setting. So it's dialogical by nature. It is built from the ground up around questioning and asking deep contextual questions so that we are not just listening for surface level and responding with an idea. Our coaches know that when we go into a coaching conversation, we are not trying to fix the problem and we don't always have to have a solution. Instead, we're actually trying to elicit the solution from the educator that they have inside of themselves. And we collect a lot of data because, as you said, I'm a data nerd. So one of the things that we collect from the people that we coach in terms of an evaluation, but also from our coaches is during their coaching call, like what percentage of their time are they adding or providing it like additional resources, for example. And one might think that, we're providing lots of resources all the time. And the reality is we only provide resources about 28% of the time. And that means to me that educators have a lot of things at their disposal in their building. And it's not just layering on one more thing, which does feel transactional. Like, here's the solution, do this. Here's my lesson plan template, use that. That's not the way that we coach. It's really like, tell me more about what you're being asked to do. What tools and resources do you already have? How do we tailor those or maybe adjust them? So because we're really deeply in the problem solving work, I think that helps to build that connection so that it doesn't feel like I'm just, trying to give you a bit of information and then I'm going to go on my way.
Yeah. Speaking of data, this is your background. So, you have a bent toward ensuring that the evidence is there. How do you know that coaching is working? And what should administrators be measuring beyond just test scores?
That's a fabulous question. So we collect a lot of data, both from the overall program, but the individual coaching sessions themselves. So one of the things that we ask the educators that we coach to do is complete a formative evaluation of their coach. And so aligned to our coaching practice standard, they report, to the extent that their coach, uses data-driven decision-making, procedures in their coaching session, is aware of the most recent, pedagogy, uses, evidence-based resources, all of the things that we want coaches to do during coaching calls. But then we also ask questions like, do I feel like my coach has helped me grow in my knowledge and skills? Do I feel like my coach has helped me improve student achievement in the classroom? Do I feel empowered through my coach and my coaching relationships? And so those are some of the questions that are important to us. And so then we look at those, the correlations between things like empowerment and increased knowledge and skill. And when we do a program evaluation, we publish it. It's on our website for last year. We're still collecting data this year because we still have coaching happening until the end of the month.
Oh, wow.
So we can't close out the year yet. But the 24-20 or 25-26 evaluation is up. And the correlation between feelings of empowerment and reported increased knowledge and skills is a 0.92.
Oh, that's significant.
Now, I've never seen in social science research correlations that high, but the correlation between empowerment and feeling like I've improved student achievement outcomes is a 0.82. So we don't have a correlation between the work that we're doing and the outcomes that we care about that's lower than like 0.8. So that to me says that the system that we're creating, the space that we're providing, the empowerment that we're driving through education, through our educators, is translating. And then our partners tell us, again, AJ will be happy to say that, he sees it in practice. Their own classroom observations, demonstrate that teachers are changing their practice. Their own analysis of student achievement is showing that there is a correlation between those educators that are receiving coaching and what's happening in their classrooms. So we intentionally don't collect student achievement data because, frankly, we don't have any reason to have access to it. But we certainly want to partner with, our school partners to assure that they're getting the outcomes that they want to see.
Yeah. What do you do when you encounter a teacher that's not making gains, not feeling successful?
That happens, even in our world, right? So one of the things one of the metrics that we track is no-shows, which is, in a virtual way, it's people who just don't show up for a coaching session. Now, working in K-12, there's a lot of reasons, right? An IEP meeting got called at the last minute during your coaching session time, so you couldn't log in. Something else happened. Sometimes it's just forgetfulness. But our no-show rate is about 10%. So that's lower than a doctor's office that charges you your copay if you don't show up. So that makes me feel good about sort of people coming to coaching. But part of the process that we do with our coaches is they complete a coaching session summary after each coaching call. So that tells us sort of the gist of what happened in the coaching session and if they need as a coach any resources or support from us. So that would be their opportunity to say, I'm stuck here. This educator, may or may not be moving as fast as they want to be doing. Do you have suggestion? Thankfully, we don't see that very often. But the real trigger is we have to build momentum. So, and I think it's true in even site-based coaching. Once educators see success, that is, that's contagious. They want to be more successful. And so one of the most important things in any coaching relationship is finding success early so that you can build upon it. And it's just like in the classroom, right? If we wait for 9 months to measure the outcome, those kiddos are going to be really, bored, aggravated, or checked out long before then. Yeah. So even in a coaching relationship, if we can find that success early and that start to build that momentum, it turns those relationships around.
Yeah.
I think the other second thing is having low stakes accountability, like accountability with a lowercase a, which is that leader in the building saying, hey, Ildi, I noticed that you're not scheduling your coaching session, because they have access to like usage data, the basic information, like how many sessions somebody's had in a month, how many minutes they've used, and so on. And so if a leader, checks in and nudges their staff a little bit, that's always really helpful. That's a partnership between us and them, because obviously they have, the ability to do that a little bit differently than we do just via email and other things. We find our most successful schools and our most successful teachers are those that have a structure of some kind of accountability and support in the building. And people get out of it what they put into it, just like anything. And
Sure.
So that's one of the things that we try to communicate to educators that we're coaching. If it feels a little hard at the beginning, we hear you. Might be new. This might be the first time educators ever had coaching. Is the first time they're being coached by a Ribbit coach. And so, we're learning how to be coached at the same time that we are receiving coaching. that can be a little bit daunting, but having some, the support alongside from their leader as well as their coach, I think makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. Where have you seen small or rural schools innovate in ways that big systems really should be learning from them around?
I think, the ability to innovate in the small and rural communities is so great because they have to, right? It's just by circumstance that you can't, assume that all the other things are going to fall into place. I do think it's around collaboration, finding time. So the idea of like building professional learning communities or time for professional learning into the contracted day. I've seen some really interesting and innovative strategies there. Also, just giving permission for things like doing coaching during, an afternoon, if you have a Wednesday early release, for example, which a lot of systems do. Allowing for coaching to be done during that time, in addition to either the after-school PD or really crazy idea, provide a differentiated professional development plan where you have like a choice board and teachers, based on what they need, can actually go to and find the resources that they want. One of which might be, for example, like a Ribbit coach, so that we don't have all of our staff doing the same training or workshop, especially those that could be leading the training or workshop, having to sit through those. So I think those are innovations that don't cost any money at all. It's just being willing to give over a little bit of control. And I feel like rural leaders are great at doing that because there are so many things that they have on their plates as well that I feel like they're excellent at delegating.
True.
And so being able to say, I don't need to own the delivery of all of the professional learning in my school or my district. I can figure out who in my building can be, utilized in effective ways and come up and strategically support professional learning in a way that doesn't have to cost any other money.
Yeah. You're working with teachers that are novice, first year, right out of school, right out of a alt-cert program or something like that, all the way to veteran teachers that have been there for 40 years.
Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about what does that first year teacher alone in a remote rural school need most during those early months of their career?
Honestly, I think it's just routines and procedures. It's thinking about how do you set up your classroom so that you can get the most out of it. And that seems such a basic thing, especially for those of us who have been around a long time. But a classroom runs either effectively or it doesn't. And if it doesn't run effectively, almost always the root cause is a lack of clear routines and procedures, or a lack of teaching the students the routine and procedures that you had in your head. Because sometimes it's right here, though we haven't spent the time actually teaching those. And so I think helping first-year teachers, again, especially in rural communities, because what they have available to them to create the procedures in that classroom might look different than in an urban setting. Yeah. And so being able to figure out what are all the resources and then sit with somebody and think through, okay, let's problem solve this. Where are the challenges? Is it during transitions? Is it during, when they're coming in from into the classroom from recess? Is it transitioning from whole group to small group, right? So really investigating where the pain points are, collecting some data around that from in the classroom, and then trying to tackle those issues kind of piece by piece. Mm-hmm. But to me, routines and procedures also then translate into classroom management issues, right? So it starts to snowball, I think, from there. And you can't teach an awesome lesson that you prepared if you can't get kids to pay attention to you or they're not where they need to be. Yeah. So, if we can shore up really strong routines and procedures, especially for first year teachers, I think that sets them up for great success.
Yeah. On the flip side, so how do you keep an experienced educator engaged and growing rather than just kind of coasting, which I've seen them do? So our experienced educators' testimonials are my favorite of all to read and hear from, and some of them are in our evaluation document on our website. Things like, I've been an educator for 20 years. I thought this was going to be a waste of my time. I just found another thing that I had to do, that another thing added to my plate.
But after working with my coach and really diving into something that was important to me, I realized how great this was, yada, yada. And so I get the biggest smile from a veteran who came into it very pessimistic, because why wouldn't they be? They've been doing this a long time, and this probably feels like something else that they might have had to do before. And so they were just kind of going with the flow because somebody told them. And once they realize that when somebody really cares about what's important to you and helping you grow in an area, and it could be, I mean, I've heard veteran teachers in the last, I would say 4 or 5 years say, even though I'm a veteran, the kids that I'm teaching are so different than the kids that I taught 10 years or even 5 years ago, that I feel like a novice teacher in some way. And so that's a challenge, right, for veteran teachers. But I think just generally speaking, once they understand the ability to like really grow in something in an area that's critically important to them, then it's not hard to get them invested.
Yeah. Well,
when it feels like a duty to do it, and when it feels like you're wasting my time, then that no one wants to be engaged in something that feels like a waste of time.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of our listeners are rural principals and superintendents that, you know, have staff, everybody's wearing 5 hats, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What is that leader's role in building a culture where coaching and growth actually happen?
I think it's making time and space for it, right? First of all, building the culture of like a growth mindset is critical. We talk about a growth mindset for our students a lot, and many of us have growth mindset kind of built into our mission and vision statements, or at least some of our strategies that we try to employ. We don't always give that same grace to the adults in the building. We don't always believe in a growth mindset when it comes to the adults that are teaching our students. So I would say it starts with, you know, leading with a growth mindset, creating conditions for coaching or professional learning that are as authentic as possible, giving up some responsibility to others in the building to help kind of lead the charge there, and then really just facilitating. I think the best leaders are facilitators. And so whatever that looks like in your community, right, it'll look different in every community. But if we ask the educators what they need and what they want, and we try to respond to it as best as we can, I think that goes a long way to helping create that condition in our school.
Yeah, definitely. What's one thing that you've learned since you started your company as a founder that's building something for educators that you wish that every school leader understood out the gate?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Only one thing.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that I wish that every school leader understood is that every educator really deserves a coach. I still think that so many leaders, it goes back to the schema that we have around coaching, the coaching for new or struggling teachers, or part of like the first 3 years of teaching. And then after that, you know, they're fine and they go on their way. And so the challenge, especially in a system where like they have site-based coaches, you know, I'll talk to leaders all the time and they'll say, oh, we have a coach for 50 teachers. Like that coach is not coaching 50 teachers. That coach is at best coaching, you know, maybe a half dozen, especially if they're first year or struggling teachers that need a lot of intensive support. And so I think shifting the mindset away from just because I have a person in my building, that doesn't mean that every coaching need is being met. And how do we think about that a little bit differently? I think it starts because they think, well, our veteran teachers are fine. They don't need anyone else in their classroom. They don't need to be coached. And the reality is veterans want people to provide them feedback and support just as much as anyone else. They don't necessarily want another person evaluating their classroom.
Right.
I would probably agree with, like, stay out of my room. I'm fine. But if you're coming in with a way to support me and to help me get better at my practice, they're open to that. And the last thing we want is to lose our most veteran teachers because they're burning out, feeling like they're not getting the support that they need. So I think the number one thing would be, you know, everyone deserves a coach, including you, principal. and figuring out the way to scale it as much as you can, as fast as you can.
Yeah. So what's on the horizon for you? What's next?
What is next? Well, we are totally revamping the software. So coming this academic year as we roll out, we've got a whole bunch of new cool features. So that's been fun, building. I am not a technologist. I can't code. So how I thought building a technology platform was a good idea, forget about it. So that has been fun. I think we continue to be really excited about partnering with schools all across the country. So we're rolling out, we respond to RFPs all the time. And so we've got a few across the country, including the Department of Ed in Oregon for early literacy coaching. So we are starting to expand outside of Arizona. So we've tried to, Arizona's our neighborhood, our hometown, our backyard. So we've got a lot of work to do here. And we know that we can expand across the country. And so we're just starting to kind of expand intentionally across the country. So that's fun. It means I get to go to conferences across the country like NBEAR and others. So if you're not registered yet, please register for the conference.
Thank you for the plug.
You're welcome. But truly, just being able to network with people and build relationships with others that are trying to do similar good work is part of my job, but it's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. Ildi, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure the listeners know?
I always want the listeners to know, regardless of what role you serve inside of a school, that we each carry a really big responsibility to model what we expect in our system. And so whether you are the leader, whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're a district office administrator, it's really important to model those behaviors and those practices that we ask others to do. So when we ask people a teacher to differentiate for their students, if we're not differentiating for our leaders and our teachers, we're just, setting a bad example. So just like any other, system, we should model what we expect so that we get those outcomes.
Yeah, well said. So, Ildi, I always end with the same question, and that is, what does the term rural advantage mean to you?
Rural advantage, gosh, that to me really means that ability to persevere, the ability to look at a challenge and really come up with creative problem solving, outside of the box solutions. I think the advantage of being in a rural community in that setting is that you don't have the advantage that other people have in a lot of cases, right? You don't have all these, big systems and, hundreds of families that are willing to come in and do things for you. So you have to be scrappy. And so I think the rural advantage is that I have never seen teachers and leaders work harder and get farther than in rural communities. And so I think that comes from, I don't know if it's in the water, if it's just the way that people are raised in rural communities. But just that willingness, that problem solving ability is outstanding and I think second to none.
Well, I agree with you. That was a great answer. Well, I want to say thank you. I appreciate your conviction that no educator should have to grow alone. And that, for rural educators who often are in their classroom in isolation, that is truly what they need. It's not just a nice idea. It really is a lifeline for them. And it gives them purpose and a reason to stay connected to teaching. So thank you for having this conversation with me about what is possible when leaders are very intentional about supporting their teachers in this kind of way.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast talking with you. It's always great to see you, and I appreciate you letting me share my passion for coaching.
Well, friends, if this conversation gave you a new way to think about supporting and keeping your educators, do one thing with it this week. Reach out to a teacher who might be carrying it all alone and remind them that they're not. And if it resonated, please like this episode, subscribe to The Rural Scoop, and leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. Share it with a leader who's also fighting to hold on to great teachers in a small school, because those actions help more leaders find us and enjoy these conversations. I'm your host, Melissa Sadorf, and remember, in rural leadership, our strength is our shared story. When we lead together, we thrive together. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to The Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from Vela Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit velaconsultants.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education. And as always, keep leaning in to the rural advantage.